I've said this before and I'll say it again. Do you know what really pisses me off? Decanonizing canon just because it makes it easier to undo what's been done versus just being a good writer and, I don't know, writing yourself out of whatever corner you wrote yourself into in the first place, whether somebody else wrote it before you or not. If you're a good writer, you should be able to do that. But I digress. Let's cut into the meat of what really still pisses me off about the Halloween 2018 storyline and timeline skew, and that's the deletion of the brother-sister storyline. Again, I know I've said it before, but I will say it again. This was stupid. 37 years of beloved mythology destroyed by two stupidly simple throwaway lines of dialogue within the 2018 film.
Wasn't it her brother who, cold-blooded murdered all those teenagers?
No. That's just a bit that some people made up to make him feel better, I think.
I can't. I can't. The fact that the writer actually wrote those lines of dialogue is insane to me. The fact that the director and producers approved these lines is insane to me. After several years, the fact that they not only retconned the sibling arc, but did it with two trashy lines of terrible dialogue in a throwaway scene is still one of the lamest, most unfulfilling, and disrespectful ways they could have gone about doing it. The horrible reality that people actually championed these lines and this retcon is still beyond my comprehension. But the fact that it was executed in this way is just despicable on every level. Again, 37 years of beloved mythology absolutely destroyed by two stupidly simple throwaway lines of dialogue. Disgraceful. Absolutely disgraceful. Fuck Halloween 2018. The Burning is such a fantastic slasher movie, and it's one of those movies that I've seen 1,000 times, but somehow always manage to forget how good it actually is until I watch it again. Do you know what I mean? I love the movie. I've seen it to death, but it's almost like watching it for the first time every time you go back and watch it again. Maybe because it's such a rich slasher film that there's just so much content to mine from it, so whenever you watch it, you sort of find something new. I mean, that's gotta be it, right? I feel like Sleepaway Camp is the same way. I've seen that movie countless times as well, and I cherish it in the same way I cherish The Burning. But somehow, in some way, it always feels like I'm watching it for the first time when I return to it for another viewing. There's just so much to see and absorb and take from it that I think you just find something new with every watch. Isn't that weird? I feel like the same can't be said with a lot of slasher movies, especially with, for example, the early entries of the franchise The Burning and Sleepaway Camp are the most inspired by, whether inspired directly or indirectly, and that's my favorite horror franchise of all time, the Friday the 13th franchise. The early films of that series, that is. Part 1, Part 2, and to a lesser extent, Part 3. I've seen those films a million trillion gazillion times, but with each viewing session of those films, I don't feel like I'm seeing anything new or watching something fresh. I truly feel like I've excavated the depths of those films exhaustively. Not that that's a bad thing, but it is a peculiar thing when compared to The Burning or Sleepaway Camp, where those movie-watching experiences still produce the opposite effect. Perhaps it's because I've just seen those first few Friday films too many times, and Sleepaway Camp and The Burning less times in comparison, but it's amazing to me nonetheless how different the viewing experiences are between those two films and the aforementioned F-13 entries. Both The Burning and Sleepaway Camp are excellent slasher flicks, and perfect for summertime movie nights, with kills and effects that not only rival those first three Friday the 13th films, but sometimes exceed them, which feels a little sacrilegious to say out loud considering how much I love the F-13 franchise. But the truth is the truth, am I right? With that said, Friday the 13th, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 all still produce that feeling for me when I watch them, as if I'm seeing them for the first time. And I've seen those entries more than any other horror film in existence, besides, perhaps, the original Return of the Living Dead. So that shows how well those films hold up today, and how much content there is to revel in within those films, which definitely says something. With all the current hoopla surrounding Rob Zombie's new Monsters film, I figured this was the perfect time to address this, and it begins with a question. Does anyone else feel like hating Sheri Moon Zombie as an actress has become more of a fad than a genuine belief? I've never been distracted by or annoyed with any of her performances, and I can't tell if there's a real hatred of her acting chops or if this is simply continued bandwagon nonsense, similar to the sudden hip trend of hating the brother-sister storyline from the Halloween franchise. I thought she shined as Baby from the Firefly trilogy, in all 3 of those films for that matter, and although some of her banter within those films came off as annoying sometimes, that was completely intentional and a part of the character in the first place. I found her performance as the mother of Michael Myers in Rob Zombie's Halloween reboot to be grounded, natural, and real. I wasn't distracted at all by this supposed bad acting everyone keeps talking about, and what she gave us in that film seemed completely believable to me. So again, I have to ask, what gives? I think Halloween 2 may be the culprit fueling this mindset though, because that movie is so universally hated by so many people, and I know the White Horse storyline is scoffed at by many of the fans. And I think Sheri Moon's performance in that film gets sort of unfairly lumped in with that hatred because of it. Even though her acting in those scenes, whether you liked the scenes themselves or not, was absolutely fine for what was going on within the story. Her small part in the Toolbox Murders was absolutely fine, and I never once found myself saying, wow, this is a terrible actress. And her roles in both The Lords of Salem and 31 I thought were very good. Again, not distracting, not annoying, believable, and absolutely fine for the content of those films. So again, what's the issue here? Is it just because of people's hatred of the White Horse content from Halloween 2? Is it this supposed nepotism nonsense that I keep hearing these kids complaining about on Facebook posts and in horror movie groups? On that note, while we're talking about nepotism, Sheri Moon Zombie is Rob Zombie's wife. Why wouldn't he put her in everything he makes? As an independent filmmaker, I can honestly say that I have, and always will, put my own fiancé in everything I make. And if I were rich and making huge big budget horror movies, I would still be putting her in everything I make. Why? Because she's my fiancé, and I like working with her, and I think she's a good actress. I think Rob Zombie probably feels the same way, since, well, Sheri Moon is his wife, he enjoys working with her, and he thinks she's a good actress. Sometimes I feel like I'm the only person using logic within topics such as these. I mean, for fuck's sake, people, come on. Sometimes meat is meat. Sometimes there are no ulterior motives. Sometimes a guy just enjoys working with his wife and honoring her by putting her in his films. If that's nepotism, then so be it. But again, this whole nonsensical hate trip seems to be more of a fad than an actual standpoint with legitimate points behind it. I guess I shouldn't be surprised. How long do you think it actually took Michael Myers to get from Tommy Doyle's house to Haddonfield Memorial Hospital? I'm not talking about how long it is between the beginning of the movie itself to the scene where he actually arrives at the hospital, but within the fictional space of time of the film itself, as if it was a real situation. How long would it actually take Michael Myers to walk, on foot, all the way from the suburbs to the hospital? An hour? 2 hours? 45 minutes? Less? More? What do you think? I always assumed the hospital was way across town, but then again, We never really see the full scope of Haddonfield, so it's hard to say how big of a place it is, beyond being a small Midwestern town. If we go by the first film, Tommy Doyle walks to and from school, so the school can't be that far away from his house. So I guess a good question to ask is, how far away is the hospital from the school? If it's a small town, and assumingly similar to the one we see on display in Halloween 4 and 5 as well, I guess one could deduce that the town is probably comprised of a town square style center of town where the shopping and school districts would be, and possibly the hospital itself, with the suburbs either encircling the district or simply tucked to one side or the other, with the Midwestern farmlands, obviously, bordering Haddonfield, evidenced by Halloween 4's opening imagery, and also in the first film, where Loomis finds the truck after making the phone call. With all that said, I'm leaning more towards the 30 to 45 minute mark as to how long it actually takes Myers to reach the hospital, not including him stealing the knife or killing the girl on his way, which probably killed 10 minutes or so of his time in real time. I just feel like Haddonfield is on the smaller side of a small town than the opposite end of the spectrum. Myers is definitely getting his daily steps in, that's for sure. I guess the real question is, why didn't Myers just drive to the hospital? I'm having a really difficult time processing the insane amount of people who are legitimately okay with Neve Campbell no longer being in the Scream franchise, and more specifically, the forthcoming Scream 6.
Her arc is complete.
Let the character walk off into the sunset.
Her story is finished.
The legacy characters are boring.
It's time for some new stories.
This is the kind of stuff I've been seeing relentlessly from those championing her exit. And to me, these people just don't get Scream. And if you're one of those people, sorry, not sorry. I'm not trying to be mean here, but I truly think that those who think Scream, as a franchise, can exist without Sidney Prescott are either lying to themselves, delusional, or again, don't get Scream. Perhaps a combination of all three of those things. I don't know. What I do know is this: Sidney Prescott is the Scream franchise. This isn't any of the other slasher franchises where the killer takes center stage, therefore allowing new stories and new heroes to weave in and out. Sidney Prescott is the backbone of this series, and taking her out of the equation completely destabilizes its foundations entirely. Unlike other respective heroines, such as Sally Hardesty, Nancy Thompson, or Laurie Strode, Sidney lies at the core of the franchise because she, herself, was the motivation for the original murders specifically, a theme that carried on with Scream 2, Scream 3, and even the fourth film. She was the ultimate and explicitly chosen target of each killer, or killers, within each of the first 4 films. Whether it was Billy's revenge for the destruction of his family unit caused by the affair of Sidney's mom and his own father, or later on Billy's own mother, who was, herself, exacting revenge on Sidney for the death of her son. In Scream 3, we got the familial connection, learning that the mastermind behind all of this was Sidney's older half-brother, seeking his own revenge on Sidney for the childhood stolen from him. And in the fourth film, we got yet another familial connection in the form of Sidney's own cousin attempting to kill Sidney in an effort to steal the show, as it were, and find her own crooked form of fame and fortune. Whether you liked these plot threads or not, the one thing that they all had in common was Sidney Prescott and the efforts to destroy her. Sidney Prescott isn't Sally Hardesty, who simply fell into the clutches of Leatherface by chance. She's not Nancy Thompson, who just happened to be another name on Freddy Krueger's list of Springwood teenagers to slaughter. And she surely isn't Laurie Strode, whom, depending on which continuity you prefer, was either Michael Myers' target by chance when she dropped off the key at his house, or was actually his sister, whom he targeted because he, for whatever reason, needed to kill everyone in his family. Either way, even though you could say that the Halloween series began as a Laurie Strode-centric series, where she was in fact the explicit target of Myers, in the same way Sidney was with Ghostface, I would have to argue that, for the chance angle, he was only after Laurie Strode because he became infatuated with her after she dropped off that key. It was not a revenge plot. As far as the sibling angle is concerned, although she would have been his target during that initial rampage, she would have just been another name on his familial list, and not some exclusive target. And again, certainly not a revenge plot. We see this play out down the road with Halloween 4, where Laurie Strode has been killed in an off-screen car crash, and Myers is now after the next family member in line, her daughter Jamie. To me, this shatters any idea that Sidney Prescott is anything like any of the other slasher movie heroines. She is absolutely not. As far as I'm concerned, Sidney Prescott exists on an island by herself because she was, and has always been, the absolute point, pun intended, of the Scream films, and the ultimate motivation of each film's killer, or killers. It wasn't until this newer entry, Scream 5, I'm not calling it Scream, give me a break, that she sort of took a back seat to the newer cast, which I did have a problem with. For the record, I really enjoyed the newer film and its cast, but the way the legacy characters were handled, especially Sidney, helps solidify my stance on Sidney Prescott and her importance to the Scream franchise. As I've said before, the franchise cannot fully divorce itself from Sidney Prescott, and making her background fodder was an extremely intrusive decision for the franchise going forward. I previously stated that a lot of people want her character to simply walk off into the sunset, and from the point of view of not wanting her character murdered, I can understand that viewpoint. But the fact of the matter is that she is the franchise. If we are to suddenly have these new cast members being killed off by new killers, without any real skin in the game regarding the supporting legacy characters, the motivations of the legacy characters, or Sidney Prescott herself, then we basically just have the Scream TV show all over again. Random and unrelated Ghostface killers targeting random and unrelated victims to the original narrative. And that just leads me to these three questions. Why Ghostface? Why call it Scream? Why should we care? Sidney Prescott is the DNA of the franchise, the heart and soul of Scream, and it ends with her. Halloween fans go to Halloween movies to see Michael Myers. Friday the 13th fans want Jason. Nightmare fans want Freddy. No one goes to a Scream movie just for Ghostface, who isn't even really an entity unto himself in the first place. But irregardless, Scream fans flock to Scream movies for Sidney Prescott and the legacy characters, whom we've been on this journey with since 1996. I would also like to point out that Sidney's story is not complete. If her character had walked off into the sunset at the conclusion of Scream 3, and we never got another sequel, her journey would have been inarguably finished, with a good sense of completion and satisfaction. But we live in a world where Scream 4 and 5 exist, and her character is anything but resolved at this point, especially now that we know Scream 6 is coming, with Gale Weathers taking part in its story, and Dewey no longer around to protect either of them. Are we just to believe that Sidney would just stand back in the shadows while her friend, Gale, just goes at this alone? especially after Dewey was so recently dispatched by Ghostface copycats? And now there's yet another wave of Ghostface murders? No, she wouldn't. Sidney Prescott would not do that. And this leads to my final thought, which is actually a major concern for the franchise and for Sidney Prescott herself. I hear a lot of people saying that at least the character is now safe from being killed now that Neve Campbell won't be in the film, and I'd have to disagree. If they can kill off Laurie Strode in between films, completely off screen and only through exposition, then they can do the same to Sidney Prescott, and that would be the epitome of unacceptable. But something very plausible, and something that I'm sure is on the table in the midst of these last-minute rewrites now that Neve Campbell has declined the film. Hopefully the writers wouldn't do that, but they could, and we've seen it happen before, which makes me more than concerned. Sidney Prescott is, and always has been, the core of the Scream franchise. Unlike any other final girl of any other horror franchise, and without her, Scream just ceases to be Scream. I realize that a lot of people find the Friday the 13th films to be the most formulaic of the big three, but I feel that's simply not true. And of course, when I'm talking about the big three, I'm referring to the Halloween franchise, the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, and of course the Friday the 13th franchise. With the Friday films, yes, we have our main serial killer stalking unsuspecting victims at whatever quote-unquote hunting ground he or she happens to be at, which is usually Crystal Lake or the surrounding area. But the stories that are weaved throughout each subsequent film are very different from one another. Is there a formula? Yes, to an extent. However, the same can be said about the Halloween or Nightmare on Elm Street franchises as well. Different stories woven in and out of the killing spree, featuring that series' slasher icon, whether that's Jason, Michael, or Freddy. To say these films are all the same seems pretty unfair to me, and it seems especially unfair to put the Friday the 13th films in that box and then attempt to say that the other two are any different. Body counts aside, every chapter in all three of these franchises is very different from one another, story-wise. I encourage you to watch these films again and focus on their respective stories versus just seeing a guy in a mask killing people, or a guy in a hockey mask killing people, or a guy with a burned face and razor gloves killing people. Those are the draws of their respective franchises, but the stories based in and around those killings are the electricity that keeps those franchises vibrant in the minds of us fellow horror fans, regardless of how many years it's been since the last entry of whatever franchise you want to talk about. For example, the Friday the 13th franchise. The first film starts with Jason's mother getting revenge for his supposed death. Part 2 brings Jason himself to the forefront, avenging the death of his mother, who thought he was dead all those years when in fact he had been surviving in the woods all those years. With Part 3, we have a backstory of a character who encountered Jason several decades prior. Then we see him get his hockey mask. Part 4 leads us to Jason's actual death. Part 5 introduces a copycat killer storyline. Part 6 sees his resurrection. Part 7 brings a new foe to face off against supernatural Jason. Part 8 sees Jason go to Manhattan. Part 9 deals with Jason body jumping and the mythos behind his evil, if you consider that canon. Jason X goes to space. In Freddy vs. Jason, he battles Freddy, with quite a bit of storyline behind that film. You see where I'm going with this? I know I just touched on the surface of those storylines from all those Friday the 13th entries, but the movies are not the same. Yes, there's a guy walking around killing people, but there are different stories at play there. Let's be honest, if they were making the same movies over and over, the second movie in all of these franchises would have been a failure, right from the start. None of these franchises would have had legs. And look at the Halloween and Nightmare on Elm Street franchises. Those are filled with rich, deep storylines. The Halloween franchise has become a choose-your-own-adventure storyline that is just batshit insane with all kinds of avenues and timeline skews to choose from, whereas the Freddy Krueger movies have always had really rich, different storylines for each subsequent sequel. So yeah, I think I'm just sick of hearing the argument of, all these slasher movies are the same, every sequel is the same. They're not. The basic structure may be very similar with each entry, but the films are not Xeroxes of the previous films. They're just not. And if you can't see that, then I don't know what to tell you. If I ever had the chance to use licensed music in one of my films, I would absolutely, assuming we had the right story of course, utilize the entirety of Alice in Chains' Dirt album. That album is a dark, moody, depressing horror story in and of itself, and it would perfectly fit an out-of-control Jacob's Ladder style, downward spiral style horror flick. This, of course, is a pipe dream, considering just how expensive it would be to license music. I've tried before, trust me, and unless you have plenty of scratch, save that dream for later. But I would love to see this idea come to fruition nonetheless. What about you? If you had your druthers and could use any kind of music, licensed music, in your short film, feature film, what have you, what would you choose? And for the sake of streamlining this question, let's make it a full album. Not songs, but a full album. What album would you use? You know what else would be a great choice beside Alice in Chains' Dirt? Astro Creep 2000 by White Zombie. That would be a fantastic album to use in its entirety for a soundtrack to some kind of really crazy 2.5 hour horror fest. Not even necessarily in the frenetic tone of an actual Rob Zombie film, but that album would just be perfect for a horror film, every song. I even think something like Nine Inch Nails' Pretty Hate Machine would be a perfect soundtrack to a horror film. That full album, man, that would just be crazy. But again, what about you? What is your dream album that you would use in a horror film or short film if you had your druthers and could choose one? Licensed, ready to use in the film in whatever way you chose fit. What are you picking? Let's talk about Stu Macher for a moment. Part of me acknowledges the fact that Stu is dead. The other part of me says fuck it, bring Stu back, and let it be as stupidly awesome as it can be. Would it create a slew of issues with the franchise? Yes. Would it make sense at all? Probably not. Do I want to see Stu as Scream's big baddie? Yes. My only issue is this. If Neve Campbell is truly no longer involved with the franchise, then having Stu back as the franchise's ultimate big baddie, if you will, would just feel tacked on and pointless. Without Sidney Prescott, the whole punch of this reveal would fall flat, and it wouldn't even feel earned, deserved, or rewarding at all. We want that confrontation between the two again, face to face, not just Stu showing up and taunting a bunch of cast members we can give a shit less about. But what if Neve is in the movie and this reveal does happen? Could they make it work? Again, I'm confident Stu is dead, and I don't see how they could convincingly say he survived, unless his rich parents paid off the coroner to replace his supposed corpse with an actual corpse and sneak him into hiding. But again, I have to admit that at this point, considering we're now in the 6th chapter of Scream, which is weird territory for any horror franchise, I don't care what they do to get Stu back in the film as the overall big baddie. I don't care if he was in a coma and finally woke up, if he was in prison and found a way to escape, faked his death in the first place and finally came out of hiding, or is simply a supernatural fucking walking corpse ghost killer guy. Fuck it. Give us Stu or give us nothing. No more bullshit killers like Scream 5. We want Stu. I don't care if he's just the franchise's big baddie at this point, or if they find a way to say he's been pulling the strings since day one, even over Billy or Roman for that matter. I don't care what the angle is, as long as we have Neve Campbell returning as Sidney and Stu Macher returning as the new, or old, depending on how you look at it, franchise's big bad. As Scream fans, We need this. I need this. You need this. The franchise needs this. Fuck the new cast and the new copycat killers. Fuck these people saying it doesn't matter if Sidney's not in the movie. Fuck all of that shit. Bring it back full fucking circle. Blow our fucking balls off. Sidney Prescott, Stu Macher, set it up to sprawl 2 or 4 fucking more movies. Then end the franchise once and for all with Stu as the Ghostface for 4 or 5 fucking movies straight. Do it. Do it. Do it. Please. The subject of this video is kind of grim, and as a parent myself, and as a normal member of society with a sense of moral code, let me just say that I'm glad Michael Myers did not do this in the Halloween 2018 film. But on that note, I just have to ask the question, why didn't Michael Myers kill the baby in Halloween 2018? Don't get me wrong, I am relieved he did not do that. Again, as a parent and as a human being, that would be too upsetting. The world is already terrible enough, with worse things happening in it every day. I don't want to see that kind of stuff in movies, horror movies or not. I don't care how much of a horror movie it is, or how realistic it's supposed to be. Stop being a fucking psycho and saying shit like, well, killing kids just shows how the movie isn't fucking around. I always hear that kind of stuff, and I'm always like, you want to see little kids and babies being killed on screen? What the fuck is wrong with you? Fake or not, that gets into taboo territory that even I am not comfortable going into. But I'm getting off topic here. Back to Halloween 2018. From a character standpoint, why? Why did he choose to not kill the baby in the crib? He killed the 11, 12-year-old in the truck. He's obviously not above killing children, at least as far as Halloween 2018 is concerned. What gives? I've heard the old, well, the kid in the truck was in his way, the baby wasn't, which, no offense, is a stupid fucking reason if you ask me. Nobody is really in his way when it comes to who he does or doesn't kill. The baby's grandmother, or mother, or whoever the fuck that lady was in the house with the baby, was not in the way. Myers went to her, so the baby is no more or no less in the way of Myers than she was. I've also heard people saying, well, the kid was a threat because he was armed. What is this, a fucking Predator movie? Even if I could entertain that logic, that applies even less to anybody in the neighborhood during his trick-or-treat killing spree. So again, what gives? He is obviously using some kind of thought process as he reviews the baby in the crib. The wheels are definitely turning as he explores the situation, but instead turns and leaves the home entirely. And no, I don't think the baby fucking starved to death either. Somebody would have obviously found it at least the next morning, probably even the same night, considering the whole damn street is butchered and this lady's doors are hanging open. Again, another stupid fucking thing I hear people say. Well, he made the baby starve. No, he didn't, you fucking mutt. Anyways, does this mean Myers has some sort of moral code? Does he have a built-in age limit as far as who is and isn't worthy of execution? Is the baby too innocent and pure for his evil to lay hands on, so to speak? A lot of theories out there, but here's what I think. And I don't care how Halloween ends up playing out or not. This is how I'm justifying it in my own mind, and I'm sticking to it. The baby in the crib reminds him of his young infant sister, who eventually grows up to be Laurie Strode. And there it is, the family storyline coming back full circle, back into the 2018 continuity, and fixing that nonsense of them not being related in this new subset trilogy. Ah! Check and mate, motherfuckers. But yes, I'm glad and relieved that Myers didn't kill the Bambino. That would have just been too awful, even for the Shape's standards. The kid in the truck was almost too far for my taste, but the baby would have been on an entirely different level. The trailer for the forthcoming Interview with the Vampire series on AMC makes me feel a bit better about the show. It was not at all the dumpster fire I assumed it was going to be, based on the initial news and casting. The choices made regarding the character mythologies and backgrounds were definitely changed, or updated I should say, in order to give way for the show's more quote-unquote progressive production, something we've, for better or for worse, come to expect with almost everything produced these days. I'm just hoping that the show isn't woke for the sake of woke, and that the filmmakers are legitimately trying to tell us a sincere story versus placating the aforementioned woke era, just because they feel they have to. With that said, the visuals look great, the actor portraying Louis seems like he's doing a pretty damn good job, and the guy portraying Lestat has, surprisingly, won me over so far, at least from what I've seen so far. Do I think Anne Rice would have approved of this direction for the story completely? I don't know. Before she passed away, God rest her soul, she gave her full blessing for the show, as did her son, from what I heard. But there has been little to no involvement from the Rice family since those initial meetings, so whether or not they'd be fully on board with this direction is beyond me. My biggest gripe with the show is this: the 1910-ish setting versus the 1700s settings of the book regarding the first portion of the story. This was, again, updated to fit the progressive nature of the casting, but bringing the story into the 1910s right from the start already makes the story too recent, if that makes any sense, because by the time we get to the actual interview segments, Louis will only have been dead for about 100 years or so, versus the typical 200. Also, Claudia seems a bit too old, but I guess we'll have to wait and see how that fleshes out. All in all, I'm somewhat looking forward to this, and I will definitely be checking it out. As an avid fan of the novels and the 1994 film, I can't believe I'm suddenly intrigued by this new take, but again, the trailer somewhat won me over. However, I am still waiting for the Vampire Lestat and Queen of the Damned adaptations, with a digitally de-aged Tom Cruise returning to the role, though. How epic would that be? Today, we're not going to talk about any one specific horror film or slasher icon, but instead about things, characters, and scenes that could be considered horror, yet come from non-horror properties. So this should be pretty fun. For this video specifically, I want to talk about Home Alone, and in particular, that damned dreaded furnace from Home Alone, an object that Kevin believes to be haunted, hence why he avoids the basement as much as possible. Now, Home Alone is obviously not a horror movie in any way, and is probably one of the top 3 most beloved Christmas films ever made, so it's interesting to think about some of its creepier elements, and rest assured, the film definitely has its share of creepy moments, such as the ominous third floor, and the Old Man Marley storyline.
Yeah. Look out!
But none of those compare to the basement sequences that feature Kevin's old pal, the aforementioned Furnace, who seemingly comes alive every time Kevin goes downstairs, its innards glowing with glowing cinders, growling and gnashing at Kevin in extremely threatening fashion. Of course, these are all childhood delusions of Kevin, but this fact doesn't stop the scenes from being bizarre, unnerving, and sometimes even frightening. Luckily for Kevin, all it took was a swift shut up, and the haunted furnace was stripped of all its power.
Shut up!
Go, Kevin. But what about you? Did the evil haunted furnace from Home Alone ever freak you out as a kid? Let me know in the comments below how you felt about this furnace from hell. I have a strong feeling that there's 2 camps of people when it comes to this question. Those who are legitimately frightened by said furnace, and those who are lying. But again, let me know in the comments below, and let me know if I should cover Old Man Marley himself in this Scary Stuff in Non-Scary Movies series within TobattoVision. Thanks for watching. In another example of scary stuff found in unscary movies, I'd like to base this video around Uncle Buck, and that creepy-ass party clown that Buck ends up having to give a knuckle sandwich to. Uncle Buck is absolutely one of the greatest movies of the 80s, and definitely top-tier level goodness when it comes to John Candy movies, just like every other John Candy movie now that I think about it, except for maybe Canadian Bacon. But within Uncle Buck, there's a small scene, probably less than a minute long, where Buck, throwing a birthday party for his nephew, hires a party clown to entertain the kids. Things go south, though, when the party clown finally arrives, late no less, and is soon found out to be drunk.
Hey, you need any dildo jokes? I'm the guy!
What did you have, a few drinks this morning? Huh? I think you did, didn't you?
After Buck confronts the clown, and the clown in turn insults Buck, Buck tells the clown to leave.
I don't have to take any shit from you. You know who I am? In the field of local live home entertainment. Oh my God!
Get in your mouse and get out of here.
When he initially refuses, he lays one hell of a whopper on the grease-painted nightmare. Again, this movie is in no way a horror movie, but I'll be damned if this clown didn't scare me to death when I was a little kid. The way his nose deflates along with that squeaky sound effect after Buck punches him, and the manic confrontational attitude is enough to unnerve anyone. Thankfully, the scene ends with Buck finally punching his lights out, which brings us as the viewer back to reality and away from this grease-painted nightmare. A freaky-ass clown nonetheless. Someone should write a horror movie based around this grease-painted nightmare. I mean, I'd watch it. Funny point of interest. The clown himself is played by none other than Mike Starr, which you probably recognize as the guy from all those movies, am I right? So weird to me that he's the guy playing the clown, but the voice is so obvious once you realize who it is. And it's like, how did I not recognize the voice before? I literally just found this out a couple years ago. But anyways, what about you? Did the clown from Uncle Buck ever give you the creeps? Let me know in the comments below, and as always, thanks for watching. We need to discuss the zombies from Michael Jackson's Thriller music video / short film, because these zombies are inarguably and absolutely some of the freakiest, creepiest, most unnerving, and most viscerally scary members of the living dead to ever appear in live-action media. The way they slither and crawl and dig their way out of their respective graves, mausoleums, and even sewers is already enough to give anybody the chills. But accompany that with their visual appearances, and you have some truly frightening visuals on display here, especially when it comes to the hero zombies, aka the zombies that feature in close-ups and or on screen more than one time. I mean, these things are absolute nightmare fuel. Let's take a quick look at some of the scarier zombies of Michael Jackson's Thriller. See what I mean? These things still give me the creeps, especially the dude with his mouth hanging open and the guy who crawls out of the sewer. 100% nightmare fuel, am I right? And if visuals weren't enough to really seal the deal for you as far as these things being absolute nightmares, take into account their physicality, their movements, their moans and groans, the shambling. These actors and dancers really sell themselves as legitimate reanimated corpses, because the way these things move and interact with the physical world around them is equally macabre, especially when they're slowly surrounding Michael and his girlfriend, and all you hear are the groans and moans and the sound of feet shuffling, or at the end when they're taking over the dilapidated house, and all you hear are their moans and groans and the sounds of them busting through the walls and floorboards as the scary sounds and music crescendos. Nightmare fuel, people. Nightmare fuel. If you haven't seen Thriller in a long time, or if you're simply looking for a zombie kick without wanting to dedicate your time to an entire movie, watch Michael Jackson's Thriller. It will surely scratch that zombie itch, I guarantee it. I realize there's a ton of people out there absolutely loving the newest Predator film, Prey, and I have to admit, I didn't hate it. The physical design of this film's feral predator, however, raises far too many questions as far as its relation to the classic Yautja seen in the first few films. Is it even the same race? Do the classic Yautjas exist concurrently with this one? Is this what predated the classic Yautja? Is this a variant of the Yautja, like the Super Predators? And so on. Just so many questions that, unlike the mysterious Alien franchise, I want answers to. I can find no definitive information on this, so no matter what you people in the comment section try to tell me, at the time of me making and releasing this video, we have no concrete answers, am I right? No matter what the deal is regarding the race or variant of this feral predator, he, by hook or by crook, obviously has some kind of connection to the Predator faction seen at the end of Predator 2 because of the pistol connection. The Yachtjaws obviously come into possession of the gun at some point between Prey and Predator 2. So again, I have to ask, is the feral predator a previous version of the Yachtjaws that the classic Predators evolved from? Which is a weird thought, considering this is only a few hundred years prior to Predator 1 and 2. That would be an extremely fast-paced evolution right there. Or is he simply a variant of the classic Yachtjaw that sort of exists concurrently with the rest? I mean, if Predators is still canon, we have to believe that both the classic Yachtjaws and the Super Predators are already out there somewhere in space, right? It's baffling to think about. But I do want the classic Yachtjaws back again if the franchise is to move forward. Not the feral predator, not the DNA predator from the Predator, and not the weird-looking classic Yachtjaws of the AVP and the Predator films, who did not look correct, but the classic versions seen in the original film and the first sequel. That's the look I want back. Not this, not this, not this, and certainly not this. I do want to see more of these guys, though. These motherfuckers were not fucking around. They do need to be bigger stuntmen, though, so the heads don't look so bobbly. So, regarding that Prey ending, where the pistol is revealed, the same pistol we saw exchanged between the Yachtjaws and Danny Glover at the end of Predator 2, we have to talk about that whole situation. Now, regarding Predator 2 itself, I fucking love that movie and I think it's absolutely the best film of the franchise. Yes, even over the original. But I also acknowledge that those of us that feel this way about that first sequel are definitely in the minority. Most people place the original film at the top of their list, while also concurrently bashing Predator 2 for how terrible a film it is, which they are wrong about in every sense of the word, but that's a discussion for another time. What I'm getting at is this. Since Predator 2 is such a non-beloved film among the masses, I was surprised, pleasantly surprised, mind you, but surprised nonetheless, to see the film so directly acknowledged by Prey, with the plot thread featuring Raphael Andolini himself, him teaching the tribe how to use the pistol, and the eventual ending where Naru takes the gun back to her tribe. The filmmakers are at least acknowledging the canonical existence of Predator 2, and are obviously intent on connecting Prey to it down the road, which is very cool to me, regardless of how I feel about Prey itself or not. This is a very cool thing for the filmmakers to have done. But here's my question regarding that ending, and how it affects the overall continuity and lore of the stories that could and may happen in between Prey and Predator 2. Specifically, relating to that pistol, such as, how does the gun come into the possession of the Yachtjaws again down the road? Somewhere between Prey and Predator 2, the Elder Predator has to take this item, presumably as a token of combat. So, are we to assume that after the events of Prey, this dude, the Elder Predator, comes to Earth, wipes out the Native American tribe in revenge for the death of the feral predator, and takes the gun as a trophy, before eventually handing it off to Kerrigan in Predator 2? I mean, some bad shit definitely has to happen to the tribe somewhere along the line for the Yachtjaws to gain control of the pistol, right? Or, do you think something will happen where Naru, or one of her descendants, ends up teaming up with the classic Predators to fight the feral predator faction in the 1800s Wild West or something like that? And he sort of is gifted the gun by them or something? I don't know. Again, are the feral predators variants of the classic Yachtjaws? Are they competing clans? Are they primitive ancestors? I don't know, but I need to know. Unlike the mystery of the Alien saga, which should remain mysterious forever, even though it's already been massacred by Prometheus and Covenant, I actually want these aspects of the Yachtjaws explored. What do you think? Now that both the Alien and the Predator franchises exist beneath the umbrella of the House of Mouse, I think now would be a good time to not only consolidate the two franchises respectively, if Disney truly is considering going through with future installments, but to also simplify what's already there. And what I mean by this is clarification, simplification, consolidation. I cannot simplify it any more than that, but I can tell you what I mean by this and show you what the hell I'm talking about. So let's dive in. On the Alien side of things, and we're only speaking towards feature films here, not comic books or games or anything else, movies only. We have Alien, Aliens, Alien 3, Resurrection, AVP, AVP Requiem, Prometheus, and Alien Covenant. On the Predator side of things, and again, only speaking toward the movies, we have Predator, Predator 2, AVP and Requiem respectively, Predators, The Predator, and Prey. Not huge franchises in and of themselves, but some of the most convoluted franchises nonetheless, especially when you boil down the timeline discrepancies, character discrepancies, and so on. So besides hard rebooting both franchises, why don't we do it an easier way, and simply officially decanonize certain films in both franchises, and officially announce the new official roster? That's what I would do if I was in charge, and it's definitely what the powers that be should do if they plan on keeping these franchises going. Here's how I would do it. Out of the entire Alien franchise, only Alien and Aliens exists. Nothing else. No Part 3, as much as I love that movie, no Resurrection, no AVP 1 or 2, and definitely no bullshit prequel nonsense. Those fucking movies destroy the mysterious aspect of the franchise. And out of the entire Predator franchise, I would just keep Predator and Predator 2. No AVP films, no Predators. As much as I liked that movie and its Super Predator storyline, nope. No The Predator, and maybe or maybe not Prey. That film was a take it or leave it situation as far as I'm concerned. But I think the first two films are stronger without it. But I'm sure there would be a lot of people whining about it being retconned from the series at this point, so yeah. Make a new roster, just the first two films of both franchises, officially, canon-wise, then go ham with the proper sequels from that point forward, eventually culminating in a well-made AVP film down the road or something. What do you think? Dream sequences have pretty much always been a staple within the horror genre, showing us a bit of the psychology of the story's characters by reveling in their dreams, or in most cases, their nightmares. A lot of times, these sequences are played off for a simple jump scare or two, and usually don't have much bearing on the story, while others cater to the story's thematic elements and help fuel the story with potential clues of things that may or may not come to fruition within the real reality of the respective character. Either way, these sequences usually go two ways. They're either goofy, cheesy, and contain possibly one or two of those aforementioned jump scares, or they are legitimately frightening and leave the audience with a looming sense of dread long after the in-movie character wakes up. I obviously prefer the palpably scary route, and whether or not the content of the dream itself plays into the overall story or not doesn't matter much to me, as long as it is actually scary and actually has an effect on our character. For me, the most horrifyingly bizarre nightmare ever seen in a horror flick is the werewolf mutant home invasion scene from An American Werewolf in London. To this day, that scene unnerves me to the bone. It is palpably scary, legitimately frightening, and really chills you to the core by how out of nowhere it really is. I mean, if you look up the word abrupt in the dictionary, this scene is probably its definition. It is so shocking and so abrupt that it gives the sequence an almost snuff film-like quality, as if it's so in the moment that it's hard to believe you're not seeing the real massacre of this family, even though it's surreal and the scene itself is filled with werewolf-like creatures. It feels uncomfortably real, and it is fucking scary.
I'll get it. All right, hold your horses. All right already.
Ladies and gentlemen.
I would put this damn scene up against the entirety of any other home invasion movie out there. The scene is so damn shocking. The way these werewolf mutant soldiers look is absolutely terrifying too. I mean, just look at these damn things. That is nightmare fuel for sure, especially this dude. They all seem to be variants of some kind of werewolf humanoid, each with a different look, and each more frightening than the last. The palpable fear of David Kessler, who is a Jewish-American character within the story, is also subtly addressed with this scene, if not only by the sheer fact that the werewolf mutants are dressed akin to Nazi soldiers, which is never directly addressed by David in the film thereafter, but since we know his background and we see these creatures dressed this way and behaving this way, it's hard not to see what Landis was trying to speak toward here. Not just the nightmares fueled by David's own slow transformation into a lycanthrope, but the deep-seated fears of his people over the atrocities that occurred just 4 decades before the year this story takes place. True, genuine, real-life horror, done in a subtle yet horrifying fashion on film. The scene abruptly ends when David's throat is cut, and he wakes up safe and sound back in the hospital, greeted by his future lover Alex, who assures him that everything is all right.
I've just had a nightmare.
Not to worry, I've just the thing.
Holy shit.
Yep, we said the same thing, David. We said the same thing. A truly fascinating and bizarre sequence from one of the best werewolf films ever made, and probably one of the most well-crafted horror films ever made in general. But what about you? Did you find the scene as unsettling as I did? If not, what other nightmare sequences did you find to be absolutely terrifying? Let me know in the comments below. There are so many memorable dynamic duos in pop culture, especially in film. Riggs and Murtaugh, Doc and Marty, Taggart and Rosewood, Wayne and Garth, Bill and Ted, and so on and so on and so on. But when it comes to the horror genre, there's only one dynamic duo that comes to mind. Not that there aren't any others. See Helen and Madeline, Chucky and Tiffany, the Frog Brothers, and so on, but because these two are simply so good in their respective roles that they really are the horror dynamic duo to end all other horror dynamic duos. And of course, I'm talking about none other than Frank and Freddy from 1985's The Return of the Living Dead. Played in glorious comedic fashion by both the late and great James Karen and badass Tom Matthews. Frank, played by Karen, and Freddy, played by Matthews, are some of, if not the, most memorable duos in horror film history, chewing the scenery with hilarious yet believable frenzy, lines of dialogue that have transcended what it means to be a memorable movie quote, and antics that are so cartoony and so outlandishly bizarre, yet fit so well within the confines of the insane tone of Return of the Living Dead. You really grow to love these characters by the time the movie ends, and it's actually quite tragic and truly heartbreaking to see them fall to such horrible fates. I mean, Freddy becomes a foam-spitting zombie trying to eat his girlfriend, and Frank, trying to end it all before he turns into a flesh-eating member of the undead himself, burns himself up in the crematorium's retort, ensuring that he doesn't become a zombie and that he can't hurt anyone after his forthcoming transformation. He even kisses his wedding ring and hangs it up before doing this. Damn, what a sad scene. Obviously, nobody has a great ending in this movie, except for perhaps the military guy, who surely goes on to live out his days eating lamb chops for both lunch and dinner on a regular basis. But anyways, Freddy and Frank are horror's #1 dynamic duo, and I will take anyone to task who says otherwise. If you've never seen Return or haven't seen it in a long time, watch it, and you'll understand exactly what I'm talking about. Matter of fact, the same could be said about the sequel, Return of the Living Dead Part 2, where Karen and Matthews return, this time playing different characters, but pretty much the same people in spirit when it all boils down to it. Not as good as Freddy and Frank, but seeing them back together again is a damn hoot, and I love every damn moment of it. So again, Frank and Freddy, or Ed and Joey as they're called in the sequel, for the damn win. Same amount of syllables in each respective name. Frank and Ed, Joey and Freddy. Weird. With that said, big shout out to Bert and Ernie of the original film as well. Although they're not as memorable as Frank and Freddy, at least not for me, they're right up there. And I'm sure they top a lot of people's own lists of the most memorable horror dynamic duos. What's sad is this. Out of these 4 characters, Bert, Ernie, Frank, and Freddy, Tom Matthews is the only one of them still living. So a big rest in peace to James Karen, Koo Gallagher, and Don Calfa. The Myers house from Halloween 5 is fucking brilliant. I know that's a sacrilegious statement for many of you out there, and I cannot deny my love and appreciation for the aesthetic of the classic Myers house, but I'll be damned if the Halloween 5 Myers mansion isn't a beast unto itself. It's giant, it's expansive, it's dark and creepy and gothic and has huge ceilings and nooks and crannies for days. I mean, what's not to love about this house? Again, as a sucker for continuity, strict continuity at that, for some reason I'm able to not only forgive the filmmakers for this radical choice as far as changing the look of the Myers house goes, but I am also able to freely embrace said change without that typical feeling of betraying continuity I usually have when it comes to these kinds of changes. Why? I don't know. Perhaps it's just because of how big and bold and in your face the aesthetic change is within Halloween 5, which was already in and of itself a very bold and different type of Halloween movie. I've said it before many times, and I'll say it again, many more times I'm sure. Love it or hate it, Halloween 5 is totally a European horror movie and really borders on that giallo line as far as atmosphere and tone and pretty much every other aspect of the movie. And I feel like the Gothic mansion-style Myers house is a direct result of this abstract presentation, and I am fucking here for it. The H5 mansion is probably my favorite version of the Myers house in any film and within any continuity, and I wish they had kept it for Halloween 6. I mean, as much as I liked the house in 6 and how it looks, as if it could be a remodeled version of the classic Myers house, I would have loved to see this Gothic mansion make a return. I mean, the size of it could have been downplayed for reality's sake if they really wanted to carry it over into H6, without it seeming like this monstrous house. I mean, the actual H5 house isn't the monstrous mansion it seems to be in H5 anyway. You can thank fancy camera angles and lighting for that. In real life, it's just a big house, but not the damned Edward Scissorhands mansion castle it seems to be within Revenge itself. It's just a big old creepy house. The H5 Myers house for the fucking win. There's a ton of movies out there that contain scenes which absolutely make me crave pizza. Not to say that I'm not always craving pizza anyways, because I am, but I think you know what I'm talking about. Scenes in movies where they're either talking about pizza, eating pizza in extremely gratuitous fashion, a good example being the pizza scene from Home Alone, where the whole damn family is eating that delicious-looking chewy-ass pizza, or, of course, the Ninja Turtles movies, specifically the opening sequence from Secret of the Ooze. I mean, those damn scenes make me need pizza in my life every time that I watch them. But what about horror? Are there any horror movies that do this? Well, I am happy to report that yes, there are plenty. But with that said, I'd like to point out 3 films specifically which make me crave pizza like there's no tomorrow. Even though they're pretty gross scenes, I can't help but crave a slice or two every single time I watch them. First up, we have House 4, and specifically the singing pizza scene. It's disgusting, it's nasty, the pizza spits up slurpy sauce saliva all over the film's lead, but I'll be damned if I'm not craving a greasy, pepperoni-ridden slice of pizza from some gritty 1-star reviewed pizza joint downtown by the time this scene's over. Up next, we have The Dream Master, and of course we're talking about that infamous meatball scene. It's crude and gross and disgusting and gnarly, but as unappealing as it may be, that goddamn pizza looks fan-fucking-tastic, soul meatballs included. I mean, I cannot be the only one, right? Right? And last, but certainly not least, we have another Freddy venture, The Dream Child. And with this pick, I'm not referencing a specific scene, but the entire damn movie in general, because of Freddy Krueger's look. Now, I think many of us would agree that Freddy's makeup got a little lazy by the time Nightmare on Elm Street 5 rolled around. With that said, though, you can't deny how deliciously reminiscent it is of a scalding hot, extra cheese pizza. I mean, look at that makeup. Do yourself a favor, the next time you watch The Dream Child, make sure you have a pizza ready to go. And there you have it. Horror movies that make me want pizza. There's a ton of others, but I think I'll open up the floor to you guys. Let me know in the comments section below what horror movies make you crave delicious pizza, and why. Thanks for watching. Although Freddy Krueger is definitely at his scariest in Nightmare 2, see my Is This the Scariest Freddy video, my overall favorite look and portrayal for the character is actually not Part 2 Freddy, but in fact the version seen in New Nightmare. Also known as Demon Freddy or Real Life Freddy, New Nightmare Freddy wasn't the classic Freddy we all knew and loved, but instead a real-world demon taking on the persona of the in-world fictitious movie version of Freddy, and for me, New Nightmare Freddy seems like the ultimate rendition of the character overall. It was a bit sad to have classic Freddy relegated to a fictitious character for the sake of playing with real-world tropes, because this meant that classic Freddy didn't actually exist within the canon of this film. And it was a bit strange in that this real-world demon Freddy wasn't actually a child killer who was burned alive and reborn as a nightmare-invading madman, but instead an ancient being who simply took on the persona of said fictitious Freddy. I'm making this sound way more confusing than it actually is, I promise. My point is this: the fact that this Freddy doesn't have the backbone of the in-canon events of the previous installments, because in New Nightmare the movies exist as the movies, it doesn't take away from the pulp and punch and visceral quality of the character. He's big, he's mean, he's jacked, he's got white eyes, he's got an organic glove, black leather pants, a big black trench coat, an inverted sweater. I mean, what's not to love about this Freddy? I was slightly saddened to see them return to the fake, fictitious Freddy Krueger of the actual franchise for Freddy vs. Jason, versus keeping the quote-unquote real-world approach of new Freddy alive and well for succeeding sequels, but I can also understand why they did that. Jason wouldn't last 1 minute with real-world Freddy. As a matter of fact, no one would, hence the return to the Freddy of the original canon. And this is coming from a guy who considers Jason Voorhees to be the best slasher villain of all time. New Nightmare Freddy is just too much of a juggernaut for any other slasher icon. And don't fucking tell me, well, he would be no match for Pinhead. Well, you're fucking right. but you're also a fucking moron because Pinhead is not a slasher icon. But I digress. New Nightmare Freddy is evil, slick, serious, cunning, and I have no doubt that he would whip classic Freddy's ass all over Dreamland if he were to ever somehow square off against him. What do you think? I've been pondering a soul-crushing realization as of late that sort of has been at the back of my mind for the last decade or so, but something that never really seemed concrete to me until more recently, and that is the fact, well, probably fact, that Kane Hodder, the man, the myth, the legend himself, the Jason Voorhees for a huge bulk of, if not the majority of Friday the 13th fans, will most likely never play Jason Voorhees in a live-action feature film ever again. I understand that he recently did the video game stuff as Jason, which is incredibly cool, and he still does horror movies here and there, still does conventions, and I assume he will probably keep playing Victor Crowley for as long as he can. But I just don't see us ever having our wishes granted as far as seeing him in the role for any F-13 venture going forward, which sucks big time when you think about it. Not because Jason X was a bad movie to end his Jason stint on. Quite the contrary. Jason X kicks major ass and has a huge fucking cult following in and of itself, but probably because of what happened regarding Freddy vs. Jason. Ken Kersinger aside, what you think of the film itself aside, Kane should have been Jason in that movie. The fight between Freddy and Jason that had been built up for years and years at that point wasn't just a fight between Freddy and Jason that audiences wanted, but a fight between Freddy and Jason played by Robert Englund and Kane Hodder respectively, not just Robert Englund and some guy as Jason. Now again, I know a lot of you enjoy that movie and Ken Kersinger in the role, and I'd be lying if I said I hated anything from that movie truly, but understand that I'm not being negative about the film itself. I'm shedding light on how shitty a situation that was and is for both Kane Hodder himself and us longtime F-13 fans. That was the fight we wanted, and what we got, well, wasn't. Enjoyable? Sure. Entertaining? Sure. What we wanted? No. And think about this. Jason X was 20 years ago this year. This year being 2022. If you're watching this in any other year, then it's even older. And that movie was filmed a year or two before that. It's been a long, long time since Kane played Jason in a movie. And the fact that so many people still want him back in the role is a testament to how good of a job he did. And like Robert Englund's Freddy Krueger, if they were to announce a new version of Freddy vs. Jason today, I guarantee you that you'd be hearing fans shouting nothing but Robert Englund and Kane Hodder. Now, as of this year, Kane is 67 years old, so he's definitely starting to get up there in years, especially for a stuntman like him who's been through so much and has played these grueling roles for so long. But 67 isn't too old. He could still kick ass as Jason if he wanted to, and if the studios were to cast him back in the role. I mean, he's still playing Victor Crowley, right? That role is no less grueling than Jason's. In fact, it might be more grueling. So for anybody saying he's too old, kiss my ass. I mean, sure, if they waited another 15 years to make a Friday movie, yeah, he'd probably be too old. But if they were to make it within the next 2 to 5 years, have a good plan, make sure he doesn't have to do any of the crazy stunts himself, and so on, Kane could definitely play Jason again, in the same way Robert Englund could still play Freddy, if they just planned things correctly and were smart about it. But alas, I digress, because as much as we want Kane Hodder back in the role of Jason, it probably won't happen. I'm not going to say it won't happen for sure, because anything is possible, and I cannot predict the future. But it probably won't. Here's to hoping, though. When it comes to horror movies and clowns, they seem to go hand in hand. I mean, you're not really finding any movies outside of the genre that prominently features clowns, am I right? At least not many that I can think of. No family films, no dramas, no comedies, but horror movies about clowns? I could list off a hell of a lot of those. But my question for you today is this. What is creepier? Clowns that are intentionally frightening, or clowns that don't look or act threatening at all, but are? If you want some examples about what I'm talking about, some good examples of intentionally frightening clowns would be Pennywise the Clown, both versions. I mean, this clown, even when he's not teeth out and eating children, does not look like a normal happy-go-lucky clown. Another good example would be Killjoy, Captain Spaulding, Art the Clown, Twisty, or perhaps even Stitches. These clowns are all intentionally frightening and deliberately off-putting, both visually, audibly, and so on. Some examples of normal-seeming clowns that are in fact incredibly dangerous beneath the surface would be, well, I actually can't think of any. And that's my fucking problem. Let me explain. In real life, for as long as I've been alive, intentionally frightening clowns have always been less scary to me, by far, than happy-go-lucky normal clowns that aren't supposed to look or sound scary. Clowns that are supposed to be joyful and friendly are absolutely horrifying. I don't know if it's the big smile you know is probably forced. I don't know if it's the very fake, upbeat attitude that's probably a total sham. Or if it's just because there seems like there's more to hide, lurking beneath the guise of a normal clown, than one who's downright frightening to begin with. I don't know. But happy, smiley, normal clowns are way scarier than those with sharp teeth, or grimy makeup, or contacts, or whatever the fuck. Yet there aren't any horror movies that I can think of off the top of my head where the clown was a happy-go-lucky normal clown who just does terrible things. Every clown movie I can think of features intentionally frightening clowns. And that sucks. Well, it doesn't suck because I love a lot of these movies and their respective clowns. But where's these grease-painted monstrosities? I mean, look at that. Give me these things, man. Imagine this fucking dude strolling down an old dirt road at night, lit only by the moonlight. I mean, that's a big no from me, dog. Matter of fact, I'm gonna go and set my security system right now. On that note, thanks for watching. There's an endless amount of horror movies that fall into the category of being what I like to call criminally underrated, and House 4 is definitely one of those movies. Criminally underrated, criminally underappreciated, and still flying so far beneath the radar of horror fans that it almost makes me sick. Mind you, the film is not as good as the original, and absolutely nowhere near as good as House 2, but House 4 is still damn good. Not only as a House sequel that takes it back to the haunted house aspects of the first two films, after the acid trip that was the horror show. A good acid trip, mind you, but an acid trip nonetheless. But damn good as a horror movie in and of itself as well. Is it weird to bring back the character of Roger Cobb, but seemingly forgetting about any of the character's history? Yes, it is. I mean, Roger Cobb in this movie seemingly has no memory of that first house or his first child, and this new story and setting are completely out of left field. But regardless, having William Katt back in the mix as Roger Cobb, albeit a seemingly alternate timeline Roger Cobb, is awesome nonetheless. If you've never heard of House 4, do yourself a favor and see it. If you haven't seen it in a while, watch it again. Toxic waste, exploding cars, singing pizzas, the works. House 4 for the win. I feel like no one ever talks about this movie, neither in the horror community itself or elsewhere. And I'm not sure if it's because people don't really know whether to consider it a horror movie or not, or if perhaps it's just not as well remembered a film as I like to think it is, or if it was simply forgotten by the masses. Sort of lost in time, as it were. But when it comes to movies about witches, I think those of us that remember this film, and or grew up watching this movie, can all agree on this. The Witches of Eastwick is one of the best witch films out there. It may not be straight up horror, per se, but it does verge on that line. I liken it to Beetlejuice, Gremlins, Scrooged, and other movies like that. Not horror, but horror nonetheless. Like you could see Gremlins and Beetlejuice in the horror section of an old video store, right? Yes, of course you could. Matter of fact, I have. I lived through that era, so don't tell me that these movies aren't horror movies. But anyways, I digress. The Witches of Eastwick is a fantastically atmospheric movie, especially for its day and age, with some truly memorable sets and locations, some fascinating and imaginative concepts at play, and a remarkable cast, chewing the scenery at every turn. Cher, Susan Sarandon, Michelle Pfeiffer, phenomenal in this movie. But Jack Nicholson is the crazy-ass cherry on top that really makes this movie what it is, acting as sort of this evil demon rich guy that rolls into town, influences people in the town to do some truly hellacious stuff to one another, all the while becoming the town's resident pimp Mac Daddy by not only making all 3 of our resident witches into his girlfriends, but they all end up giving birth to his kids. Spoiler alert, sorry about that. I mean, I don't want to give too much away about the end of this film or how everything turns out, because I want you to watch the movie for yourself. But I will say this, when it comes to witch movies like The Craft, Practical Magic, and even to a more family-friendly extent such as Hocus Pocus, The Witches of Eastwick should definitely be on your watch list for every annual Halloween season. I mean, what's not to love about it? What's not to love about The Witches of Eastwick? Watch it now. You'll be surprised by how good a movie it is, and how well it still holds up. But before we end this video, I have to ask you, the people, do you consider The Witches of Eastwick to be a horror movie, even if only subtly a horror movie in the vein of Beetlejuice, or Scrooged, or Gremlins, or Casper, or Hocus Pocus? Or do you not consider it horror at all? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. What if Tommy Jarvis hadn't gone to dig up Jason that night? What if it had been Reggie instead of Tommy, digging up the body of Roy Burns? What if it was Roy's corpse that got struck by lightning, bringing him back to life in order to seek his undead vengeance at Pinehurst Halfway House? This was, in a nutshell, the plot of an idea for a Friday the 13th fan film that I had a few years back, aptly titled, Roy Lives. And I even went as far as to make a little mock-up poster for this potential project. Check it out. The idea for Roy Lives never really got off the ground, because I never really legitimately pursued it, but it would have, obviously, been a successor to the story from Friday 5, A New Beginning. I think there's a lot of potential fun with this idea, and I'm still casually mulling over the idea of actually doing it. Whether it ever actually happens is still anyone's guess, but my question for you is this: would you watch a film like this? We could even make Zombie Roy so powerful that the only chance to beat him is to resurrect Jason himself and let him go toe-to-toe with the disgruntled zombie paramedic/ambulance driver. How cool would that be? What's your favorite vampire movie of all time? This question isn't very hard for me to answer, because while there is a slew of pretty good vampire fare out there, I don't think there's that many great ones. I would say there's probably 10 or less that I would consider to actually be great. Films like Bram Stoker's Dracula, Fright Night, Near Dark, My Best Friend's a Vampire, From Dusk Till Dawn, Vampires, and so on. But when it comes to vampire films that I would consider to be masterpieces, there's really only 2 of those in existence. And not only are these 2 films masterpieces of the vampire subgenre, but also of the horror genre as a whole, and of films overall. They're also both in my top 20 favorite movies of all time. And what movies am I talking about? Interview with the Vampire and The Lost Boys. Masterpieces of vampire movies, masterpieces of horror, and masterpieces of film in and of themselves. It just doesn't get any better than these, nor would I want them to. These movies have their own subculture, like The Return of the Living Dead or Point Break, just larger than life, bigger than the movies themselves, and so on. Just subcultures of their own. and I love everything about them. Now, if you were to ask me which of the two I preferred more than the other, that would be harder to answer. That hierarchy fluctuates daily. One day it would be Lost Boys, the other it would be Interview with the Vampire, and back and forth and so on. Probably until the end of time. Horror film perfection, to say the least. But again, what is your favorite vampire flick of all time? Or are you like me, where it's pretty much a tie between two separate films? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. I consider An American Werewolf in London and Silver Bullet to be the best werewolf films ever made, by far. But as far as the actual transformation scenes go, I think the original The Howling has the freakiest version by a long shot. The transformation itself, how it's shot, how it plays out, and the way the face looks as it's turning from human to wolf is absolutely nightmare fuel. The fact that it's a pretty intimate scene as far as the proximity of the characters from one another and the space of the room goes only adds to the terrifying quality of the sequence. I mean, look at that. That is, again, absolute nightmare fuel. The fact that the character is frozen in fear while this transformation takes place, instead of running to safety, seems like perfectly applicable behavior to me here, as she was probably just stuck between fight or flight, and unable to move at all, until her brain finally caught up with what was happening. Once the werewolf is fully transformed in the film, I find it less thrilling than the transformation scene itself, and I think the wolf creature from American Werewolf becomes the scarier version again, but I'll be damned if that transformation scene itself isn't the freakiest one in existence, at least from what I've seen thus far. Remember the Halloween 25 Years of Terror documentary? Of course you do. It was one of the best Halloween documentaries of all time. Well, remember that chick Heather Bowen? She was the girl who won the contest to appear in a future Halloween film? Well, this cameo was for a future Halloween film, not one that was actually in active development at the time. No one, including Mustafa Akkad, knew exactly what her cameo role would be in this next installment. The event itself, which actually took place in 2003, roughly 3 years before the documentary was actually released, was fresh out of the ashes of Halloween Resurrection's wake, which came out just 1 year prior. So I don't think anyone at this convention could foresee that the franchise's next big move would be a straight reboot by Rob Zombie 4 years down the road. After a bunch of things happened within those 4 years, including the untimely death of Mustafa Akkad himself, the franchise would eventually be revitalized with the aforementioned Rob Zombie remake in 2007. But whatever came of Bowen's cameo? Well, she apparently did in fact get to film her cameo for the movie, but her scene ended up getting cut, and worse yet, it apparently doesn't even appear in any of the deleted scenes. Man, that has gotta suck for her, huh? I feel bad for her, actually. I mean, here you are, a huge fan of the Halloween series, you win this contest to be featured in a small cameo in the next film, then you finally actually get the chance to do it 4 years later, only for your cameo to be cut entirely, the scene itself never even seeing the light of day as a deleted scene, and your name pretty much falling into obscurity within the franchise itself. That is a damn shame if you ask me. I believe she played a news reporter or something like that, but then again, who the fuck really knows, right? Maybe one day down the road she'll get to finally have her cameo in a future Halloween installment. I mean, here's to hoping. Definitely long overdue. I don't know how many of you have read the 6-issue Lost Boys comic book miniseries from a few years ago, but they ended up releasing a graphic novel-style compendium of the full 6-issue run, and it was glorious. And that's how I ended up purchasing and reading through that entire story, is with said compendium version. It was a great continuation of the story of the first film, and if I'm remembering it correctly, I don't think it tied in with that weird Frog Brothers comic book series that came out around the time of The Tribe. I think this miniseries sort of retconned all that, and I think it sort of retconned the actual sequels themselves as well, but I could be remembering those aspects wrong. I really need to reread the series again, that's for sure, because I enjoyed the hell out of it. But I'm not here to review said series or the graphic novel compendium version of the series, which I own. I mean, it's a fantastic read and does deserve a review down the road, but I really wanted to touch on the character of the Believer within the story. And yes, the Believer is none other than the epic saxophone guy from the original film, fleshed out as a fully functioning and well-rounded character of importance within this comic book. And damn is it epic. Tim Capello played the character in the movie, and his likeness is used in this comic as well, so it feels like a true lineage of what began in 1987, but we finally have an official name for the character here, dubbed in comic as the Believer, which is as epic a title as we could ever want. I don't want to spoil too much about the character's arc or the overall story itself here, so let me just say this. The Believer is a very important character to this story, and we see a lot of him throughout. It's not just a cameo, it's a full arc. I mean, how awesome is that? Also, side note, the most epic part of this, and this isn't a story spoiler or anything like that, the baby oil we see him greased up with in the original film is revealed in the comic to actually be some kind of vampire thwarting liquid that helps protect him during his battles with vampires. I don't remember if it was like garlic oil or if it was some kind of holy water mixture, but it was something like that. I mean, how fucking epically awesome is that? The Believer for the win. 1981's The Funhouse is packed to the brim with an array of macabre imagery. To me, the most frightening visuals were not that of the film's main monster, but instead the strange and off-putting animatronics tucked deep within the bowels of the Funhouse attraction itself. These things always gave me the creeps. You see them throughout the movie, especially after the kids have stayed behind within the attraction in their attempt to spend the night there. But I think you get the best look at these things during the film's opening credits sequence, where you see them on full display in all their horrible glory. I mean, if this isn't nightmare fuel, I don't know what is. There's also that scene where the Funhouse is being shut down for the night, and you see everything sort of getting powered down, and boy is it a spooky vibe unto itself. I don't know about you, but that creepy lady thing with the gnashing teeth and sharp nails is one of the freakiest animatronics I've ever seen. But I won't give all the credit to the animatronics in the Funhouse itself, because there's some much needed respect owed to the one and only fat lady out front of the attraction itself. While she's funny and goofy and all that stuff, there's a frenetic creepiness to this animatronic that I find to be pretty unnerving, especially at the end of the film, when she appears to be laughing at the film's final girl. I still haven't been able to figure out if the movie is quietly suggesting that these things are sentient or not, but who knows, right? What I do know is this: the animatronics in the Funhouse are absolute nightmare fuel.